I said to a professor.
I recognized you too.
Okay, let's start. So everybody see the screen, right? Okay, so let's quickly go over what we are going to do. Last week we did the great learning, which is the Confucianism, and today we are going to do Mozi, okay, so-called the first opponent of Confucius. And the next week we're going to talk about Yang Zhu. I think we had people asked me talking about Yang Zhu long time ago, and I think eventually I'm getting there. And a little bit kind of like apology for Yang Zhu, because people heard about him. A lot of people talk about he is selfish and ego.
Jason?
Yes, please.
Jason? I don't know about anybody else, but I'm really struggling to hear you.
Oh, you cannot hear?
The sound is pretty, yeah.
Yeah, I can barely hear you. I'm wondering if you have a microphone settings in your laptop, if you go in and turn that volume all the way up in settings for the input mic.
Actually, there's settings for the, there's also settings in the Zoom app.
Is this better?
Under audio.
Right now it's better?
That's good, yeah.
Is it okay now?
Yeah, go ahead, just keep it up.
Okay, all right. So I probably have to speak loudly, yeah. Okay, so
Might be better if everybody mutes who isn't talking. It sounds like there's a feedback at the trail of what you're talking.
okay, so let me see. So I'm going to right now I'm going to mute all, and then you can unmute. Okay, so let me see.
Yeah, it's much better with everybody muted.
That's better, Jason. I think if you just stay a little bit
like this, okay? Okay.
That's good.
Okay, great.
James, it's actually you that's lowering his voice.
Well, anyway, okay.
Probably anybody on mute.
Okay, so please keep unmute, and I know most of people are regular. Okay, so I think we know how to do it, and just let me know, if not hear clearly. Okay. So I assume it's okay if nobody complain. Okay. So so basically we are going through, and then next week we talking about Yang Zhu. And then we are going through basically through this some key subject, because we would like to go through a few different schools. So let's officially start. Since that's the first time we are doing the this kind of meetup, so I kind of like want to do it, put in the 3 sections. The first part, I will give you everyone the background. I should not assume everyone have been attended all the meetup. So gives everyone a little bit background, so you know what's the background, and then that's the way I want to do it. And for the people who never or have very few background. And then I'm going through the main subject of the Feng Youlan's writing. Okay, so that's the second part I will do. And finally, I will, based on last year's suggestion, I will also give the original text, and then we'll go through like 1 chapter or a few key subject, so we can talk about this. So before we go through the background, anything you want to talk about? Any question? Okay, so let's move on. Let's always start from the background. So the long history. Okay, so right now I just want everybody familiar with the situation. Make sure everybody know the situation. Chinese history is very, very long, and right now we are talking around about this time. Okay, that's Qin Dynasty is the first time China become a united country. Okay, one country. So we are talking about 500 years ago. At that time, they have the so-called warring state and the spring and the autumn during that time. Okay, so we are talking about that old. So at that time, okay, according to the history, we call it the 100 schools of thought. Okay, so but I assume 100 just a name to mean a lot of schools. So I'm going to list the famous people here, so you can get the idea. So according to the historical account, Lao Tzu, probably the oldest, 571 B.C.E, and he probably lived very long, so we don't know what time he, which year he died. So, and then Confucius, okay, I think then Mo Tzu, that's the today we are going to talk about. The next one will be Yang Zhu, that's the next week we are going to talk about. Then Mencius, Zhuangzi, another Taoism. And I think Qin in February is going to lead everyone to read one chapter about Zhuangzi. Then Xunzi, last year we talked about, he also a Confucian scholar, but his idea is different than Mencius. And then Han Fei, okay, Han Feizi as a legalism. Okay, so eventually Qin Dynasty here at 221 BC, Qin Dynasty unite the after series of wars, unite the entire China, become a one nation. So basics, that's a list of all the, not all, the major schools. So give everyone a background. See, because today's when we talk about Chinese philosophy, or even the entire East Asian philosophy, people constantly talk about Confucianism and the Taoism, and sometimes Buddhism, but forget about a lot of the dynamic, okay, in the ancient time. So in the first few meetup in this year, I'm going to bring up the different schools, so you will have an idea, how does the Confucianism and the Taoism come in, and some of their background. Mark, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Okay, on the list of the 100 schools of thought thinkers, the 5 thinkers, Lao Tzu, Mo Tzu, Zhuangzi, Sun Tzu, and Han Fei Tzu, I noticed that the first 2, the Tzu is spelled T-Z-U, and on the last 3, it's spelled Z-I. That's the same character, is it not?
Yeah.
Just the...
Thank
so
you.
why is it transliterated differently for the first 2 than the last 3?
Okay, thank you for mentioning this. The quick answer is my laziness. Okay, so I should apologize for this.
Oh, that was you. Okay.
So that's my fault. But either way are correct. But I have some excuse to doing so, because Lao Tzu, Mozi, Yang Zhu, okay, Lao Tzu and Mozi, they are. This name has been used for a long time in the Western world. So the weight and the gyre spelling is more popular. And the Zhuangzi, the Han Feizi, and the Xunzi has been introduced to the Western world later. So that's why I use Chinese pinyin. Okay, so that's one of my excuse to do it. Okay, but both are the same. Okay, so whenever you see TZU or ZI, that means Zi, that means Mr. So in the analect, Confucius analect usually say Zi, say something. So Zi means Mr. or teacher. So in ancient Chinese, the Zi, okay, usually use the last name. People hardly call another person's first name, okay, because it's rude. Only your parent will call you first name. So people always call your friend, teacher, last name. So you will call some last names Zi, that means a teacher. But Zi also means the book. Okay, my last name is Pen, so my student should call me Pen Zi. Okay, and the book I wrote, okay, will call Pen Zi also. Okay, so that's the tradition to do it. So whenever you see Zi, sometimes get a little bit confused because it could mean the person. It also means the book. James, please.
What happened to Mencius and that people were so disrespectful as not to call him Mencius?
Thank you for mentioning this. Okay, that's you see Confucius. I also call, they don't call Kongzi, right? They call Confucius. Okay, again, that's the Jesuit priests. Okay, missionaries. Okay, they went to China. Okay, so they are looking for, you know, all the Jesuits. They are educated doctors. Okay, so they are very interested in culture, in philosophy. So when they went to China, okay, they try to find out, okay, what kind of culture, what kind of tradition they have. So I truly believe, okay, there's no historical account, okay, it's a Romanized name, okay, but I truly believe they probably ask the people in the countryside. They are not asking the scholar about this book. Okay, because in Chinese scholar, people don't call Confucius. Okay, Confucius means Confuzi. Okay, they romanize the name, but Confuzi is not the way the scholar, traditional scholar, would call Confucius. Okay, in traditional, if the Jesuits, the scholar, okay, ask the scholar in China, they probably will say Kongzi. Okay, so they will spell as Kongzi, but if they ask on the people in the countryside, they probably say Confuzi. That's why they translate, romanize as Confucius. Later on, okay, they find the second sage, okay, the Confucius is number one, and the second sage, so-called Mengzi, the last name is Meng. So they just kind of like make it like Meng Fuzi, so okay, Mencius. So that's the way the history coming out. So hope I answer your question. Okay. David, great.
Yeah, and some of, I mean, to follow up, I mean, is this correct? I've heard that, I mean, Confucian, what we call in the West Confucianism, actually existed prior to Confucius. I mean, Confucius. It's called Ruism, or there's at least an effort to the Ru is the more philosophy, and there's an effort to try to switch back, or I guess from China or parts of it, to use Ruism, similar to Taoism, to others, as the name that should be used for this philosophy, not Confucius. Is that?
Thank you for mentioning this, and that's also one of the subjects I would like to talk about today. Okay, so it's supposed to be important issue. Okay, Confucius like to promote the rectification of name. So today that's a chance. Let's make it clear. Okay, since you mentioned David. Okay, so let me explain this situation. In Chinese, or I say all the Asian society, people don't call. Okay, don't use the word Confucianism. Okay, people call Ru. Okay, so just like in the conversation, people will say, okay, he is a Ru scholar, okay, or the professor in the Taiwan University. I say, oh, this Professor Li is a Ru scholar. We don't call Confucianism scholar, okay? So he believed Ru teaching, not Confucian teaching. Confucian is totally westernized, okay? So back to the question, Ru is long tradition before Confucius, the person, okay? Confucius is following Ru's tradition and give teaching to, and have, so according to the historical account, he has 3,000 students. So after that, okay, they, all the Ru tradition only go to Confucius teaching, okay? So no other school than in Ru than Confucius. That's why, you know,
Confucianism and the Ru become one thing in Western tradition, and also technically in the East, in the Asia tradition. Okay, just in Asia, people call Ru, but in the West, people call Confucianism. And you are right. Technically, we should call Ru tradition, and the Confucius is one of the master in the Ru tradition. So I hope the answer, I make the question, the answer clear. So any question about the 100 school? We suppose not go to all the detail about the 100 school, but we just give you an idea. So everybody good? Okay, let's move on. I share this screen in another meetup, but I find out that it's probably important. I should not assume everybody know the situation. So based on the history, 221 BC, that's the first time China has one nation. Okay, that's the first time. Before that, okay, long time ago, according China, let's assume have a 5,000 years history. So at 250 years ago, that's the first time it's a united nation. Okay, before, okay, it's not a one nation. Okay, so you can see we constantly, let's show this one first. We constantly talk about the warring state. Okay, in the warring state, we have 7 major kingdoms. Okay, they are fighting each other. So the time inside of 2 minutes, the situation requires somebody in charge of the team time out. Begin. Is Douglas?
Doug, could you please mute yourself? Douglas, mute yourself.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. That's fine. Okay. So we have the 7 kingdoms. Okay. So I think the period is from about 200 years fighting, continuous fighting. The 7 kingdoms become one kingdom, which is Qin. You can see a little bit clear here. Major city we are talking about Qin. Okay, Qin is on the western side, and eventually Qin conquered the other 6 kingdoms and become one nation. Qi is on the east side. You can see Beijing is here, Shanghai is here, and the Qi is on the east side, and the eastern side, and the Confucius is here. Okay, so all the Confucius teaching usually is from this side in the Shandong, today's place, and the legalism. Okay, is popular in the Qin dynasty, Qin kingdom, which is on the west side at that time, being considered semi-barbarian. So, and you would know, for 100 school, they all try to resolve the problem. Which one work? Okay? That's the legalism. They happened in the Qin eventually. When I say work, that means utilitarian work. That means united all the kingdom together. So that's the legalism on this side. And constantly people interested in the Taoism, Lao Tzu and the Zhuangzi. That's on the Chu, okay, on the south part. When we say south, it's not really on the south, like Hong Kong, this area, even on the north of Shanghai. So that's the Chu area. Okay, so I think that's the general idea. And then you may think about like the 7 kingdoms, that's a lot. Let's go back, okay, to another 200 years. So if we look at on the so-called the spring and the autumn period, okay, in this period, which is about the 500 BCE, that's 200 years before the warring state, they have, we don't know how many kingdoms, okay, or you can say a feudal kingdom, feudal state they have in China. If you see this map, okay, all the white area are so-called barbarian, and the one with color is called cultured world. Okay, so Chinese constantly want to call the under the heaven, under the sky. That's so-called area. Okay, so from Beijing here, Shanghai here, Xi'an, which the terracotta soldier. Okay, here. So just 1 minute. Okay, so that's all the state we have. And people may ask how many state? I don't know. Okay, according to, I checked from the internet, okay, people said at least a few hundred of states. So you can imagine during this time, Confucius and the Mo Tzu during this time, from a few hundred states, and they are in 200 years process to become 7 states. Okay, so what kind of situation it happened? You can try to imagine. Okay, in the world, have a few hundred countries, and they have the 200th war, then become 7 countries. Then another 200 years constant war, then become 1 nation. So that's a long process, and you can start to imagine what kind of situation if you live during that time, and what kind of school of thinking will come out. So that's the situation we have. And today we are going to talk about during the end of this time. That means, very close to the end, the spring and the autumn period. So probably not, they don't have 100 nation during that time. They probably already reduced to much less, probably 20, 30, okay? And you can see the size also big difference. They have some state and huge, some state are very small. And some area are rich, like this area close to the ocean, that's the rich area, usually because they can sell the salt, okay? And on the west side, usually they are poor area. So we have a few hands up, and then let's go to James and James.
Is there any deep meaning for the use of the terms spring and autumn?
Yes, okay. Because Confucius, okay, writes or comment a book called, he wrote, because Confucius, I say Confucius from Shandong area, but actually, technically I should say Confucius from the state of Du. Du is a small state, okay, in this area, okay, Qi, okay, and this area, okay, that's Confucius coming from. And the Du is, has a history, and Confucius comment on the history. And somebody said he wrote the history and comment, I don't know. But when you can see Confucius, how brief in the Chinese culture. Confucius write history, he is not writing in a way like January 22nd, something happened, January 23rd, something happened. No, even not weekly, not monthly. He wrote only on spring this year, autumn this year, something happened, spring this year, autumn this year. So it constantly on the spring and the autumn. So people call this book as the spring and the autumn, and also use this period to call this time, okay, as spring and autumn. So that's the reason. Yeah, Donna, please.
Yeah, were there some massive changes in military technology that influenced that merging?
Okay, yeah, a good question. That's also my belief, and people have a different view. I think during the, before this time, okay, before the spring and the autumn, that's kind of like feudal system, or a feudal system. So they have the Zhou dynasty. The Qin, you can see, and the Qin have 10 sons. Those give the 10 state, okay, for 10 sons. And each son have 10 sons. So keep going on. I think that's no different than the Western Europe. Okay, same thing happened. But Western Europe have this situation happen all through to the, let's assume, 1848, right? So then the things start to change. But China finished at 221 BC. I believe one of the change is the technology, okay? Because before the weapon, they are using bronze, okay? Bronze is expensive, and then you can make a few only. So the size of war probably only 100 people, kind of like a gentleman's game. Okay, so the aristocrats, they fight each other. So that's it. But after the discovery or the technology improve on the iron, okay, then the things start to change. First, iron is much cheaper, okay, and sharper. It's hard, okay. So first you can use is agriculture. China is an agricultural state. So with better tool, they a lot of area, the so-called the barren area, you can start to use iron as a tool. Okay, you can grow. Okay, so the land will increase, and a lot of land before was useless become useful, and then have more people. So another thing you can use is make a weapon. So use iron is much cheaper, so you can make a lot of weapon. So you can see on the historical account during the early spring and autumn period, the war usually talk about 100 people. The people die is 100 people die. But during the later time of this area, okay, during the Qin Dynasty try to conquer, something I read is like 300,000 people die. Okay, so you can see the size of the war being changed over a few hundred years. So you can draft the regular people, give them a iron sword, okay, so they can fight. So I think that's the technology change. Of course, they have many other reasons, and we can talk for hours, days about this situation, but that's the answer. Yeah. Phil, please.
Yeah. Yes. In contemporary China, we talk a great deal about the Han people versus the minorities. Back in the spring and autumn period and the warring state period, maybe even during the first dynasty, were these primarily Han people that had these states, or were they integrated already, mixed in within it, other minority people that are not Han? And so were the original Chinese actually Han, and then expanded beyond the Han population?
Okay, I think, thank you, Phil. That's also a complex question, okay? Chinese doesn't have much concept of, Chinese called barbarian, okay? But unlike Western barbarian, when people call, similar to Greek concept of barbarian, okay? The Greek, when they call barbarian, usually means the people non-Greek, okay, Persian, okay, in the Africa carcinage, okay. So people on the different area doesn't mean not much means the race different. Same as China, when people call Han, okay, the people call Han because after Qin, remember Qin Dynasty unites all the state, and the Qin Dynasty only lasts for 15 years. After 15 years, they have the Han Dynasty. So Han Dynasty lasts for 400 years, okay, from 200 BC to 200 AD. Okay, so that time Han start have a contact, okay, with Roman Empire. So at that time they don't call Han, but that's start of the name, coming out, because that's the dynasty. So we call Han. But before that time, okay, so-called barbarian, that's a moving definition. Okay, it's not fixed definition. You can see the state here. Usually in this area, it's so-called the real Chinese, but later on still grow. Okay, but I'm sure in this area, okay, close to Shanghai, okay, area, that time they just consider being just recently culturalized, being learn the culture. So I read usually Confucius would talk about these people. That's the primary Mongolian people as a barbarian, and the South also barbarian. That's a different kind of barbarian. And the southern barbarian, the description is speak like a bird, okay, Okay, their tongue, the bird's tongue. Okay, that's the way they talk about. Have long hair, speak bird's tongue, and have a tattoo. Okay, that's the description. That's the so-called barbarian. But right now it's in today's Shanghai. So it's kind of keep merging together. Okay, I think that's try to make the answer short. That's right. But otherwise, that's another question, another long history we can talk about. And again, the one thing very important is actually there's two kinds of Han we talk about. Han, it means the race of China. But during that time, the Mongolian, the name Mongolian never come up. But these people before Mongolia, they also call Han. But this Han is different kind of Han, not the Chinese Han. But I try not to be too complicated, but that's my answer. Mark.
Yeah, to address this question about ethnic minorities and Han, I think the concept of Han doesn't really exist, is my understanding, before the Han Dynasty. When the Qin Dynasty united the warring states, the different states, they used different characters, they used different ways. Han Dynasty stabilized that culture and created like a unified culture that became the core of modern Chinese culture. Talking about the Han prior to the Han Dynasty is kind of like talking about white people in the times of the Roman Empire. It's not a category that really means anything. Like even in the United States originally, there were Italian Americans and Irish Americans and German Americans and Dutch Americans. Now there's like white Americans, Hispanic Americans, Black Americans, and Asian Americans, and those other categories are like almost meaningless. So that really even has dynasty. Peter, agree with that, please.
All right, thank you, Mark. I think that's a very good example. Yeah. So we shall focus more on the today's subject. Okay. Before I move on, okay. I think we are on the good time. Okay. So before I move on, let me give you a quick survey. Okay. I just draw this chart, and I think I show this one. I make a little bit improvement this time, and then. Just the rough idea, and please don't argue on the detail. What's the progressive? What's the conservative? That's just very rough idea. I just try to lay out, put a chart for the different philosophers. Okay, so if you put the horizontal, on the horizontal, we can see if you move on this side, on your right, on the right hand side, it's a progressive. You mean making progress? Okay, for the state, for the current. That's the current situation. Just progressive, that's considered today's so-called left. We want to improve, want to make something different. And on the left-hand side is the conservative. That means you are going back. The old is good, okay? So there's a two kinds of concept, okay? So progressive and conservative. On the vertical side, I talk about the methodology, okay? So on the going up, that means we're talking about religious, okay? And the move down, we talk about human psychological, talking about use today's psychological method to convince people. Okay, so let's put this one in the plan as a coordinate. So you will see, measures kind of stay in the middle. Okay, on the conservative side, because measures, when I say measures, including Confucius, okay, so they are thinking about going back. The old sage king is good. Okay, so he is thinking about the old time. On the religious, he talk about human tendency, okay, like human nature, okay. So he deal with the psychological issue. He also talk about the mandate of heaven. So kind of have the religious sense on it. So I put him in the middle. But if you look at another Confucius scholar, Xunzi, he is talking about human nature is bad. So he hardly talk about the heaven. He usually talk about this world, this society. So I move him here, but he still promote the ancient sage king. So if you look at the Lao Tzu, the famous Taoism, also ultra conservative. He is talking not only the ancient sage king, he also talking about the before civilized society. The state of nature is good because at that time, they are peaceful, okay? And they also have a religious sense. Next week, we're going to talk about Yang Zhu, who is kind of, you can categorize as Taoism, okay, and we will talk about more next week, okay, but he is more on the individual self, not on the religious so much. Han Fei, we talked about last year. So he is different than the rest. He's talking about progress, making progress, change, and he totally discard the heaven's mandate. So he totally deals with human nature. He treats human reward and the punishment. That's the only thing he's doing. So that's legalism. And today we are talking about Mozi, okay, Mozi, okay. It's a little bit difficult combination. He is talking about the progress, okay. So he wants to change the society, but he has a religious thinking. He believes God, believes ghost, okay. So that's a different kind of combination we have. So we are going to do it today. So that's just a rough idea, and you can argue that's a wrong place. You know, you should move up, move down. Some people should say, yeah, that's many things we can discuss. But I just like to show just a map, like, okay, that's the people we are dealing with. So I hope there's no more. Anybody have a question? Not too detailed, just get, if you don't understand or not get it, so please raise your hand. Okay, everything good? So let's go to the book first. Okay, anybody want to talk about the person? Mozi, okay. Sometimes spelled as the Mozi, okay, D-I or T-I. That's his first name, okay. So the pronunciation a little bit confusing. So when we call Mozi, T-Z-U, or Mozi, Z-I, that means Mr. Mo, okay. And then Mo D or Mo T means his last name and the first name. So that's the, just 1 minute. So that's the person. And then, what else I can talk? Okay, so two traditions. I think somebody asked about the Ru tradition. So there are two different kinds of tradition in the ancient China. We are talking about 500 BC. Two traditions. One is so-called Ru, and another one called Xia. I think in this book spelled very strange spelling called H-S-I-H, something like this. But the correct spelling in today should be X-I-A. Xia, okay, that means knight errant. So there's the two traditions. Ru is kind of like help the aristocrats, okay, doing the ritual, funeral, ceremony, this kind of thing. That's a Confucius tradition. Xia's tradition, the knight errant, kind of in today's language could be bodyguard, okay, to help they carry the sword, help the aristocracy for the security, all this kind of deal with just like today's bodyguard job. So these are two kinds of tradition. So Confucianism is following the Ru tradition, and the Moaism, okay, basics is coming out from the Xia tradition. So these two are the rival tradition, and they eventually developed two different kinds of school. So that's the thing. And another thing, the Mo, okay, in Chinese means ink. So it's also possible the founder, Mo Tzu or Mo Di, he probably a criminal, okay, condemned person, because at that time, if you are a criminal, people will put the government will put a tattoo in your face. So it's very possible he is being put a tattoo on his face. That's one possibility. Another possibility is Mo also means ink, means black. So he probably has a dark skin, but in China, people are in the same homogeneous race. So dark skin probably means he's labors. He under the sun a lot, so he has darker skin. So people call Mo. That's also possible, but we don't know. But for sure, we talk about the book. This book is no way finished by one person. And then and no way just finish in a few years. So probably people keep adding up for a few years. So here I just, before I go to the book, anyone have a question or anything want to talk about the person, Mo Tzu, or you have a question or any comment? That's the time to talk about. No? Okay. So move on, talk about the book. I did this book, okay, the book. So how everybody can see. They have the 15 books and the 71 chapters. Okay, actually in Chinese tradition, it's a lot. Okay, and some of them I would say probably 10% of the chapter are missing. So it's pretty good, you know. Only we survive the book, 90% of the writings survive. So if you look at this 75 chapter, okay, let's pay a little bit attention on that. Okay. Okay, anybody, I would like any volunteer. Anybody want to tell me how do you feel about when you see this kind of book? All right. You have the talk about the befriending, the learned related discussion, self-cultivation, okay, and talk about the standard, then talk about the what's that? The heaven, talk about the ghost, anti-Confucianism, okay, and talk about the righteousness, okay, talk about the fortification of the city gate, talk about preparation of the inundation, okay, and talk about the command and order, okay. So look like, you know, talk about sacrifice against the coming of the enemy, okay. Talk about the flag, okay. Talk about like this one, talk about simplicity of the funeral. How do you think about this book? Anybody have an idea, or if you facing this book, how are you going to categorize this kind of book? So we have Madeline and the DJ.
I love this table of contents. It reminds me of a department store. But when I think of his background, in the reading that we did, he would have been a knight errant. So he was a military man. So basically, looks like the first sort of grouping on the left would be how to live with yourself, within yourself. Then he has comments on societal issues. And then I guess in Chinese, the most important things come last. So the things that are dearest to his heart would be all of the military tactics.
Okay. Great, yeah. DLJ?
Yeah, the diversity is striking, I think. Department store is good. I hadn't thought of that. I was thinking more, it's the kind of 2,500-year-old YouTube.
Okay.
Kind of resource of knowledge for like everything you can think of almost, isn't it?
Okay, that's great. Yeah. Phil, how do you think?
Well, I was surprised that being a military man, a warrior, that he was so interested in being compassionate to people. I mean, that seems like strange. So maybe the whole concept of the military back then was very different than what we have now, because it seems to be like much more about, you know, honoring the poor and not exploiting them. I mean, it seems very, very idealistic in a way. So that was surprising to me.
Donna, please.
Yeah, I'm just making an assumption here first. On book 1, chapter 3, that means mortality, doesn't it? It says undying, but I think it means on death and mortality.
No, okay. Dying, you mean number 3, right?
Yeah.
That's a teaching, okay? Because the Chinese have the silk, okay, early time.
Oh my goodness, okay. Okay.
So he talk about like you should be being with a good friend, right? So that's a metaphor. Okay, so if I always mix with against the gambler, and very easy, I start to gamble. Okay, I meet with the meetup group, everybody reading philosophy. I'm pretty good, you know. I start to read. I think that's what he's talking about.
Okay, I understand. I was thinking it was a book of both life and death transition, but I understand now what that means. Thank you.
All right, so I just share my feeling about this one. I feel this one I'm facing the Old Testament book, right? So that's what I'm saying. So because if you look at the Old Testament, even tell the ark, right, how to build the temple. And all the, so in the end, I think of course I didn't read most of them. I read some of them, like fortification of city gate. He talked about the story is like this. Okay, one person come and he is like so dark and lost all the hair because he's running, doing hard work for 15 days and never eat, never drink, almost dying because he tried to help another state to defend and talk to Mo Tzu. And Mozi say, oh, ask people to bring the wine and the food for him and tell him what doing. That's the conversation. Then start to Mozi to tell him, you should build the gate, how wide, okay, how tall, and in what way, dig a ditch, how deep. So all the technical book. So something like this, okay. So some place like, the on ghost, okay. They collect a lot of ghost story, okay. So some philosophical teaching, like today I'm going to spend some time to read Identification of the Superior. Okay, that's a philosophical writing, kind of the natural state. I compare with Thomas Hobbes, okay, writing. Okay, so that's the diversity we are facing in this book. So in our meetup and also in this book, okay, Mozi is talking about two parts, okay. Today is one part talking about more on the philosophical, ethical teaching. And the second part, okay, I think in the Feng Youlan's book called the Later Moaism, they deal with logician. If you look at some area, they are very strong in the logical, okay? So they have the very good logic, syllogism, we call, okay? Very similar to Aristotle's organ, okay? So we talk about all the categorization, okay, and the syllogism, logic, okay. So we put this one on the second part. I think in about 3 weeks, we're going to deal with that. So that's very different. So for sure, that's not written by one person, but that's, I just like to share with everyone is what kind of diversity of writing in this book. So I don't think anybody would believe that's finished by one person within 10 years. They must finish with a group of people and for probably 100 years. Okay, so I think that's the book we have. So, Mikey?
Someone mentioned, several people mentioned the concept of military and kind of almost a statement that if you're a military person, you're not in a compassionate mode or you don't have empathy. But on the other hand, one of the things that goes on in military, you get indoctrinated very quickly in the need to work together with other people on your team, and if possible, to turn the enemy into a friend. Alexander the Great was a military person, and when he went into a when he had defeated an army, he tried to turn that army into allies to go on to the next thing, to the next campaign. And he was very successful at doing that and taking former enemies and making them into allies. So you do get impressed with your mortality, and you do get impressed with the dependency of keeping your people organized and satisfied, so to speak. and trying to deal with the enemy diplomatically so that they don't hate you forever. And that included not doing a lot of collateral damage. So in general, military has been good experience for leadership. You could say that Moses was a military man. Socrates was a war hero in the Peloponnesian War, and his academy that created Plato and Aristotle was really a military academy to train future generations of both politicians and warriors, because it was a dangerous world back then. So it doesn't surprise me that Mo Tzu was also came to his world from a military perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikey. Okay, that's good to continue on his 10 themes. Okay, so this one, again, okay, I did this one is a SAT question. If you are going to Chinese culture SAT, the test for the Mozi, okay, I think they will talk about these 10 main subject or 10 theses. Okay, you can find it in the Wikipedia. That's probably the if you go to the Asian school teaching. Okay, so they teach the main theme probably these 10 theses. Let's go to these 10 theses. Okay, so that's all in today's subject, and then some we can spend some time. So I will make sure everyone understand, these 10 theses is talking what these 10 theses is talking about. So you will see he, in a way, you can say he's a military man, but he focused on the technique. So unlike Confucius, okay, Confucianism basis just talk. Okay, they never really put the hand on make their hand dirty. But Moaism are different. They talk. Okay, they argue. They work. Okay, they are not just talking about like measures, right? When the king asks, "How can I unite the state?" The king say, measures will say, "Well, why you talk about the benefit, right? You should talk about the ren. You should talk about the righteousness. You love people." But they just lip service. And Moses is different. There's a group of people. They talk about peace. They talk about that. They defend. Okay. So you talk about the state, there's a peace. Okay. So you go to the big country. They are attacked, prepared to attack another small country. And most, unlike nations, just tell, "Oh, you should do the love people. You should do blah 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 blah." Mozi will say, "We will help the small state to defend you." The king will say, "How?" "I will do this, this, this." And the king will say, "Okay, but I have this weapon." He will say, "I have this one." Okay, so blah, 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 they can talk about this. And then the king will say, "I have another way. I kill you." Okay, he said, "Doesn't matter. My people already there. Help deploy all the defense. They are going to defend that state." Okay, so this kind of school we are talking about, they are not just like Confucians or other school. They really do the work. So that's the difference. Okay, Donna, please.
I can understand every one of these in terms of his philosophy except 8. I don't quite understand that, what he mean, how that would be utilitarian.
Okay, that's a very interesting question. Okay, ghost. Okay, so Donna, can you tell me what your understanding about ghost?
Well, they psychologically, I feel they are a projection of members of the past that maybe we still want to connect with.
Okay,
but
yeah.
To me, it's a psychological projection.
Yeah, so he talked about ghosts. They have in the book, I read some of the book, okay? He talked about the ghost. And he has a utilitarian thinking about the ghost. Because the ghost is the dead person. And he play the reward and the punishment. For example, let's say A and B, okay? A owe B a lot of money, and then B die, and before he dies, say, "Oh, return the money, give to my son," and then B die. and the A reject, didn't give the money to B's son, okay? So, and then B become a ghost and try to hunt him. So he talk about a lot of this story, okay? So he has utilitarian purpose because he wants people believe good and evil. So if you do something bad, okay, the people, even the people die, his ghost still hunt you. If you do something good, even he doesn't reward you, but after he died, he's going to help you. That's the thing he is talking about. Okay, so that's why he put a lot of writing about, collect a lot of story. Of course, he had no way to believe they all true, but that's the story he collect in his writing. So, Phil, please.
Yeah, it seems like on the one hand, he does believe in goodness and benevolence, but I think he also realized the world is full of evil and badness as well. And so in some sense, he deployed, in a sense, the fear that the Christian church actually did deploy, right? I mean, you think you're getting away with it, but eventually you're going to go to hell or whatever. And like, if you could get people to believe that, then the bad people, hopefully, will at least behave moderately. I think he needed help because preaching the goodness in itself, it's okay, I think some people will believe it, but others might not. So he needed extra help from the gods.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so if you, this 10 subject, if you cannot remember all 10, okay, please remember 2, okay? If you want, in case somebody asks you what you spend 2 hours, okay, about mentions, this you can talk about 2 things, okay? I think that's the thing, number 3 and the number 4, okay? So if you want to reduce from the 75 chapter to 10 subject, and if you think 10 is too much, that's please reduce to 2. That's number 3 and the number 4. Okay. So if you come to Asia, ask people about the Mozi, okay, they probably tell you these 2, number 3 and number 4, impartial love and against the military aggression. Okay. So that's the 2 main subjects. And that basically reflect his main thinking, right? He talked about love, okay, love people. And he talked about the against the military aggression. So that's how military guy related to the love, okay, and so it's a compassion, okay. A little bit detail we can talk about. When we talk about he is a military guy, he is not attacking. He always on the defend on the weak state. So he always on the defense side. He against the aggression, but he is not just like most of the religious teaching or ethical teaching, just say, oh, no war, peace for everybody. But when the people coming out, you just condemn, lip service, nothing going on. But he really do the work, develop the technology, develop the military strategy to defend the small state. That's his idea of against the military aggression. His love, impartial love. There's a different translation, I think, in the Feng Youlan's book called the All-Embracing Love. Okay, and another translation I read to talk about universal love. Okay, I think it's similar to Christian unconditional love, or called apagate. Okay, this kind of love. So I would prefer call it impartial love. The reason of this one is the love is different is I will talk about in a few minutes. If you compare with Confucian teaching, think about Confucian talk about love. His love is degrading, okay? It's different, right? The idea in Confucius, you love your parents, your son the most, and the daughter the most. And then you love your brothers, sisters, and then you love your uncle, then you love your cousin, you love your neighbor, you love your countryman, you love the alien, you love the dog. Okay, so it's degrading, right? So I love my neighbor more than love my neighbor's neighbor. So I think that's the idea of the Confucius teaching. And then Mozian teaching, Mozi's teaching is different. It's impartial. There's no difference. He talk about love is love. Okay, there's no difference. Okay, between for the different people, similar to Jesus' teaching, right? The so-called Samaritan. Okay, so, the good Samaritan, right? So who is the good neighbor, right? The Samaritan, right? They help you. Okay, turn your cheek. This kind of love your enemy. This kind of love. So they are talking about, even both are talking about compassion. They talk about different ideas. Of course, these two traditions, they don't like each other. They criticize each other. So that's the thing I like to talk about. And then another thing important is to talk about the agreement with the superior. Okay, so basically that's his moral teaching. Okay, so same as Confucius, his idea of the society is hierarchical. They have the village leader, they have the county leader, they have the state leader, they have the emperor of the world. Okay, they have heaven. That's the ranking. So you follow the leader. Okay, so that's his argument about moral. He talked about against the entertainment. Basically, he talked about music. Okay, he thinks music is nonsense. With time, very similar to some religion. We'll talk about, oh, that's, abuse, spoil your mind. That's his idea. Other thing is he believes ghosts, but he is against funeral. Okay, he thinks Confucius spent too much money, too much time on the funeral. So that's very odd situation. I think in the Feng Youlan's writing, he called it the seeming inconsistent, right? So you think about the situation. Confucius doesn't believe God, doesn't more under this world, but Confucius spent a lot of effort on the ritual, worship your ancestors, okay? And then Moaism, they believe ghosts, okay? They talk about gods, okay? Talk about dead people, but they think you should be frugality in funeral, okay? So I think that's a little bit inconsistent, okay? So that's but we can talk about this a little bit later. So I think that's the situation we are seeing, and we can try to understand, all these kinds of things. So any question or anything you want to talk about on this 10 subject? Everybody good? Okay, Donna, please.
I just wanted to say those first two, if the word on the first two chapter points, if the worthy are truly being elevated, according to him, then I can totally understand how one wants to agree with the worthy, the superior. We don't always see that in the world, but I think, one follows from the other very clearly.
Okay, I'm glad that you see this way. Yeah. Of course, that's we can call it. Is that practical today? I think that's not much we can. We have to argue, but we have to give Mozi some credit because it's 2,500 years ago, and then put in this situation, and we can start to appreciate what kind of thinking he have. We have Kevin and Karen. Okay, Kevin, please.
Yeah, I want to reply for the number 8 for the 冥鬼. That 鬼 ghost or god. That's a tradition, culture still now exists. Let's see your relative passed away. It's going to big funeral, and especially old days. I believe that's 2,500 years ago. Those belongs to the king or something. They can pray the big one. Normally people know you cannot talk to God. Only the king I can talk it. Or I'm the king. I'm a messenger of Qin. So Mo Tzu said, everyone has rights to do so. You pray. If his relative passed away, you can pray too. Yeah. So that for me, if this is going to connect to the number 3, would be that's universal law, right? That's not just this law, not just king have law. Everybody else also has. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Kevin, for sharing. Okay. Karen, please.
I was just responding to Donna's concern about the superiors being worthy. And my question is how much, the text suggests that, that you respect the superior for utilitarian reasons as well, right? You can't have 100 different moral codes because it'll be a mess. So you kind of just have a very strong sovereign in order just to make the world work. So to what degree does it depend on how worthy the superior is, do you think, on his view?
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Yeah, actually, number 1 and number 2 are connected, right? So first, he talking about the king, the leader, is the worthy person, okay? The good person, the best person, most worthy person should be the emperor. And then they set up the minister. Then set up the king, okay, under the emperor. Then set up the leader of the village, okay. So they all the worthy person. And then second, to talk about the moral standard, you have to follow your leader. So they are connected together, okay. So the leader is always has a higher moral standard. They are better person, okay. So if I live in Los Angeles and the mayor of Los Angeles, of course, he is the leader. He has a much better moral standard. And the President Biden even better, okay, because he is the president. So we follow this. So that's the idea. Of course, you can criticize it's impractical, but that's his idea of thinking, okay. The leader should be the moral person, should be the worthy person, and the moral standard, you follow the leader. Okay. That's the concept he's talking about. We have, I don't know how to pronounce, Yogaswa.
Yes, I just wanted to ask if this understanding is right.
Okay, please.
Number 6, if you talked about Confucius, if he was saying that we should spend a lot of money and resources on the funeral. And then here, Mo Tzu says that we should not spend so much money. Do we, could it be that, sometimes Confucius could have said, yes, you should do the funeral very well. And then in the rituals, it actually, how, even in religion, how it happens that rituals become more important than what the value is. So, and then when Mo Tzu comes and understands what Confucius actually wanted to say, then Mo Tzu has to now cut on the rituals. And then on number 3, like impartial love, when Confucius says that we should step by step, we should first love ourselves, then our family, then our neighbors, then the state. You go step by step, but he wanted to reach the end. But then, people don't get the last part, like you should love the whole world. So now Mo Tzu has to say that you have to love the whole world. You have to bring in the concept of loving the whole world, like universal love. While people will just stay in the steps if they could only follow Confucius. But both of them understood the same thing, the same concept, but Confucius will take them step by step. And because people were staying in the middle, so Mo Tzu had to say that you have to bring up universal love. It's a question. I don't really know if it's that.
Well, I would say it's not a question, it's an answer. Okay, so I think you are very correct. So at least in my same as my understanding. Yeah. So they are arguing. Of course, when you hear the opponent's argument when you talk about your opponent, you always intentionally or unintentionally set up a straw man to attack. So Confucius not really talk about expense a lot of money in funeral, right? Confucius talk about proper way, right? He talk about the proper way. So Confucius also against this wasteful ceremony. He said, you have to do it, okay, in the proper way, okay? And what does mean in proper way? So that's a different thing, right? About the love. Confucius talk about love your father, love your son, love your minister, love your emperor. But it's degrading, but he doesn't say really degrading. He said, doing this first, then you can love you. If you don't love your son, how can you love your neighbor? You don't love your neighbor, how can you love your countrymen? If you don't love your countrymen, how can you love the immigrants, right? So that's his idea. So, they all focus on a different way. And thank you for mentioning this. I think you already bring the answer to the table. Yeah. Madeline, please.
Yes, I'm looking at number 10, against fatalism. I can see, the will of heaven is important. Mm-hmm. And so if you're practicing agape and following the will of heaven, I sort of see against fatalism as the most progressive thing about what he's all about. It's the least conservative. And I'm wondering if you could just talk about that a bit. Okay,
so that's a good point. It's also another situation. We got confused by the name, right? Fatalism. First, let's talk about Mozi's fatalism, okay? Mozi talk about Mozi's idea of the will of heaven is utilitarian purpose. His religious view is very different than the Christian religion. Christian, we have the God. We serve the God. We do this for the sake of God. But Moaism is God, or will of heaven is utilitarian, because the will of heaven is punish the bad person, reward the good person. So it's very different. Even both Moaism and the Christian worship God, but Moaism's God is different. He utilitarian God, punish the bad people, reward the good people. So that's the first different about the fatalism, right? The will of God. Confucius talking about the heavenly mandate of the heaven, also the will of heaven. Confucianists are not fatalism, strictly speaking. They talk about the mandate of the heaven. They talk about God's will, but Confucius even focus more on your secular effort in this world, right? He tell you, you work as hard. You don't forget that Confucianism, they are also perfectionism. They want to do everything as to the highest good. But to the highest good means all your effort, okay? Beyond that, that's the will of heaven, okay? I try to save the world. I try to save my country, but turn out I can't. But that's not my fault. I already did my effort. So that's they have the will of God want to do this way. Who knows? So that's the Confucianism about the fatalism, okay? So I think both sides, we can say they have the misunderstanding. We can say, they set up a straw man to attack, okay? So, we don't know. But I think one of the reasons, I'm glad that people ask this question, because to me, reading Moaism, okay, have another purpose. You will start to understand Confucian's teaching better, okay? So I think that's a good, and then later on, we will either this week or next week, we will read some text from Mencius, how how Mencius attack Moaism, okay? So you will see, how does these two schools dislike each other. Phil, please.
Yeah, it seems to me, looking at the whole list, that there are certain inconsistencies in this sense. I think it might be that he's from a military, he's a military man, and he's looking at things, well, unlike Confucius, which has a system that's top down and is reasonably consistent in its sort of unity of the structure. I think in Moaism, I think there's a contradiction in this sense. It's both top down and bottom up. You know, he wants, in a sense, goodness to reign, but on the other hand, like he also knows that there's problems at the bottom, and he wants to raise them up. But on the other hand, he also needs a structure that will facilitate that. So there's really a contrast between the mandate of, let's say, the virtuous people being on top and on down, but he knows that's not true. But nonetheless, you have a structure that commands something that demands order. So even when you have, let's say, somebody who's not so good as the general, you have to obey the order. Otherwise, there would be a lack of functionality. So that blending of the top and the bottom, working both in a kind of strategical way, a whole, and a tactical way to hold things together, I think becomes a problem for him in one sense. It's a very practical thing on one sense, because you got to tweak it and in a sense explain in some sense how you could produce a consistency when the top is not right, but nonetheless you have to create a structure that will hold. But on the other hand, I'm sure he knows that sometimes the emperor or the generals or whatever are the wrong person. But if you have everybody say, oh, I'm not going to obey him, like, he's a fool, he doesn't know what he's talking about, he's exploiting the system, then everything will run down. I think that's the problem with his structure.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. But I should have a little bit defense on Moaism. Moaism probably in the Chinese tradition is not being focused, okay? Because being for 2,000 years being dominated by the Confucius teaching. So if you talk about systematic, the teachings, a lot of things later people add on the Confucius teaching. Okay, so of course Confucius teaching sounds more systematic, and sounds more solid, and then Moaism teaching a little bit raw, their primary sense is there. And actually, Moaism get focused probably being discovered by the Westerner, I believe, probably Jesuit, okay, because they find out their religious sense, okay, in this one. So I think that's the real. So I don't know the truth, but my feeling is Moaism probably focus more in the Western world than the Asian world. Because in Asian, there are more Confucius thinking, and the Confucius is rival against Moaism. So that's the difference. Yeah, Isabel.
Hello. I just want to build up on a previous point made by, I believe the speaker's name was Yogeshwar. He made a very interesting hypothesis that I just want to get your opinion on, which is that perhaps there's considerable overlap between Confucianism and Moaism, in the sense that Moaism could, in certain aspects, maybe many aspects, is an extrapolation of Confucius principles in the examples that the previous speaker gave, in when he talked about love, and I believe another example he gave was on funerals. And the second difference is in terms of practicality. I mean, being a person on the front lines, he had so much more exposure to mortality and scarcity. So perhaps like there is, perhaps is Moaism then just a practical version in certain ways of Confucianism?
Thank you, Isabel. Yeah, I have not much comment on that. I think I agree with you, and then same as Yoga's work. So about this one, I think everybody have. I think I will bring up their debate, so you will get a clear idea, and then you make your own judgment on that. And of course, Moaism are more political than Confucius, but in a way he has his own impractical part, right? Because well, how can you love everyone? Okay, universal love. And well, and then agree with the superior and promote elevating the worthy. That's also in his impractical part. But you know, we can talk about this. We have a few hands up. Okay, so Kevin, Donna, and Mark. Kevin, please.
Yeah, my comment is regarding to Phil. You call the military man. I would say call the military defense man.
Yeah.
This guy, he got a lot of suggestion for, sorry to say the guy, the minister, a lot of suggestion for like small country, or you should be how to defend like small town, like preparation. If you back to Jason's the chapters, so he lots of comments about the defense. And also that's like against military aggregation, So and he also stopped. One time he stopped. He actually Jason shared one story. Stopped. Okay, you want to do it? Let's play it. Eventually they stopped. They stopped. Oh, even you kill me, still 300 people on the defense side. So nonsense. So one war avoid. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I think his group have a lot of carpenter, a lot of craftsmen. Okay, so they are not just talking about it. They really make it. Okay, really make it work. Who is next? Donna, please.
Just extending from what Phil said, when I looked at 10 against fatalism, it immediately occurred to me that this would make total sense, because on the front lines as a military man, to accept fatalism, you're doomed. It's not the right attitude. It's not a functional attitude. So that's the way I immediately interpreted that.
Okay. Okay, so thank you. We will, this is the 10, but don't forget, okay, they have another part very important. We are going to talk about the so-called the later Moaism. That's his logic, okay? So you will face totally different kind of person if you look at on that part, okay? And I personally, I'm very interested in Moaism's so-called the later Moaism, okay? They call it later because historians don't believe that it was written in the Moaism time, okay? They probably read it later, okay? So that the writing style is totally different, but they are talking about the method, logic, sophistry, okay? So language, all this kind of thing. So you will see like, oh, are they the same person? Okay, so, okay. Okay, let's move on. And here we are going to, I put a summary on the Feng Youzhan's chapter 6, okay? So a lot of them we already talk about, right? For example, we talk about Ru and the Xia tradition, okay? And talk about they have the different kind of ethic, yeah, thinking, right? And then we talk about I think I will, next slide, I'm going to bring on the Moaism's criticism of Confucianism, okay? And then this one we will talk about later. All embracing love, okay? I think we already explained this one. And then you guys are asking a lot of great questions. So turn out, most of this has been covered. The Moaism religion view, right? I just mentioned, it's kind of different than the Christian thinking of the religion. Even they look like a religion. Moaism religion are more on the utilitarian side. So I call it the utilitarian religion. Okay, they talk about ghosts, they talk about the will of heaven. Okay, and then, okay, something we can talk about is Feng Youzhan call it the seeming inconsistency. Okay, we are going to cover this one now. And Hobbes, state of nature, we're going to cover soon. And then, okay, chapter 11, okay, I think we are going to talk about in 2 or 3 weeks, okay. They are talking about his dialectics and the logic, talk about his classification and, okay, impartial love, okay. So he has an argument about the impartial love, use logic, okay, to argue. It's very rare in Chinese tradition. Chinese, if you read the Confucius, okay, teaching, usually they just tell you do this, okay, not give you much reason. Only reason they, especially in the Confucian tradition, only reason Confucius give you is the ancient sage Qin doing this. That's good, okay. But Moaism different, they develop, okay, the logic to convince you, okay, and then not only criticize on Confucius, they criticize on many different schools. That's what we are going to cover in a few weeks. Then you will see different kind of Moaism here. Mark, please.
Yeah, I have a question about Moaism and religion. I'm wondering, is the religious sentiment of Moaism like confined to like the very specific idea of ghosts of ancestors and a very abstract idea of heaven? Or is there a more personified sense of God? Like I've heard some references in ancient Chinese religion to Shangdi as a god who is like more kind of like a Christian god or something, like has an existence or a being or a name or personality, as opposed to like a more abstract kind of Tian or Dao type religious conception. Is there a religious conception that's more like that as a god, or is it really abstract like heaven? That's my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Okay, when you talk about Shangdi, okay, so basics, that's the translation of the Christian God in today's world. Okay, but in Zhuangzi also talk about Shangdi, or called 造物者, the creator. They have the concept of the highest God, but is very vague. So heaven also very vague. Okay, that's called the incorporeal. Okay, ghost is a different kind of thing. Okay, ghost is not tangible, but you are able to see it. Okay, you are able to see ghosts. Some people have the so-called yin-yang eyes. Okay, because we are living in the yang world, and the ghosts live in the yin world. So some people, okay, have yin-yang eyes. So sometimes we walk street, my dead aunt is there. So, you know, they talk to her. So that's kind of like this kind of ghost. Not tangible, you see it. And he may do something for you. Story like, you know, Chinese have the civil examination, and then somebody doing good, but he's not so smart. So he studied, you know, never passed the test. And then because he did some good deed, and some ghost, okay, at the night, try to help him, you know, help him start kind of tutoring, you know, and he becomes smart and tough. So that's kind of story running around. There's a book, Qin, okay, like to talk about, we discussed, but it's the so-called Liao Zai. That's a collector of the ghost story, okay, and he loved this book a lot. He want to talk about this book, and we discussed about this. And I say, well, he probably will bring up eventually, but he loved that book a lot. And it's very difficult to introduce because the concept of ghost is very different for the Western. So that's a story. You know, ghost, we can talk about, you know, the whole section about ghosts. Yeah. Phil, please.
Yeah, just a question. Could you say something about the dates of late Moaism? Because generally we think of logic as something that was invented in the West. Not that there couldn't be a logic that's invented in China, but I wonder if it's late, whether there was some influence already about, you know, logic, and if not the Greeks, you know, at least Hellenists, and then the Persians, in that sense, and that would transform their arguments as well. Could you say something about the dates?
Okay, I don't know the date, but I would not say it's later than the first century, right?
Okay.
Okay.
So that's internal.
That's an internal development. I should say I'm very sure, but of course, you know, no evidence. The reason I said I'm very sure is because I'm familiar and I love the Western logic. Okay, and I read the later Moaism writing. It's interesting, some similarity, but you will see the originality on that. Okay, I don't, at least in my mind, I don't see all that's the idea from Aristotle. Okay, at least I don't see that. If talk about foreign influence, I would say Buddhism has a strong influence, but this is on the later part. It's probably on the 6th century.
Yeah.
So yes, this from India. India has a long tradition of the logic, this kind of physical thinking. Chinese lack of the metaphysical logical thinking for a long time. Yeah, but that's why I think the later Mozi is important. It's not that often.
Jason, you look like you've changed your position relative to the camera, and your voice is fading out again.
Is that fair? Let me mute everyone. I think the reason is everybody can be muted because they have. Is that better now? Okay. James, I think probably you take out a lot of internet resources. Okay, but anyway, just kidding. But okay, let's continue. And please raise your hand or speak out if it's not clear. Okay, so I'd like to focus a little bit on the seeming inconsistency. Okay, we talk about this, right? Confucius focus on funeral and the ritual, but reject the existence of ghosts. Okay, when student ask Confucius, okay, how about afterlife? Confucius' answer is, if you don't understand this life, how can you understand next life? Okay, not next life. Next life is true Buddhism. It's after death. Okay, after you die, what's going on? So that's Confucius' answer. Confucius famously said they don't talk about ghosts, strange thing, heaven. He doesn't talk about this. He only talk about this world. That's Confucius to talk about. So, but Confucius focused on the ritual. I think we already talked about this. But he also against the too luxury, spend too much money to show off on the lecture, on the funeral. But he insists we have some ceremony. The important is not for the death. It's important for the people, because you have to behave in this way. Treat your dead parents as they are alive. Okay, so you can be the good person. That's my understanding of the Confucius. So that's why it looks seeming inconsistent. But if you understand how Confucius teaching on the ritual and the ghost related to that. So even they focus on ritual, but not for the death, it's for you. He doesn't believe the ghost because he wants you to focus on today's the life, not after death. Again, I feel I will put you on hold for a while. Let me finish this one. And the Moaism looks seeming inconsistent because it disregarding the funeral, okay? And then he believed the existence of ghosts. Okay, sounds inconsistent, but he has his reason because he's utilitarian. Everything he talk about is saving the money, benefit of the world. Okay, that's the thing he is thinking about. Music, ritual, that's waste money. It's not going anywhere. So we should save this money. And then the God, the ghost, because they are useful, okay, they will punish the bad people. If you constantly we see the good people not got reward, the bad people, not got punished. Ghost, the will of heaven will punish you. That's his utilitarian purpose on it. So it's seemingly inconsistent. But if you look at on their logic or their fundamental concept, you will see they probably not inconsistent. Okay, so that's my understanding, and I believe Feng Youlan in the book also explained this. So if you have a different idea, or if you disagree, or you don't understand, that's the time to discuss. Phil, please. Phil, you are muted.
Was dead. I don't disagree with Confucius having these rituals at all. Because even if there was no afterlife, even there's no ghost, no spirit, nothing, right? And even if in a sense, it's not even for the virtue of the living, then one should honor the dead for their lives. I mean, that's just the thing that you should honor somebody who had lived. And that seems very consistent to in a sense, cultivating a virtue. So I don't disagree with that whatsoever.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Madeline, please.
Yes, I'm getting the sense that, which makes sense, that this is sort of what we're talking about here is sort of like the ancient Greeks, that there were beyond gods, there were big forces that worked to justify the world in various ways, that worked for humans, that worked for nature, and that also worked on the gods, but that they themselves were not gods.
Yeah, I think that even pre-Socratic have the concept of the universal or cosmic justice, right? I think it's in the Greek word. That is my understanding. They have the universal justice. They believe justice is a little bit more kind of like a different kind of similar, but a little bit different. Yeah. Olga, please.
Okay. Hi. Thank you for great presentation. I kind of what when you was talking about ghosts, it reminded me of general ancient tradition of worshipping ancestors. It's kind of maybe it's roots of these ghosts. It's just like ancestors. It still exists in Africa, for example. They still worship and venerate ancestors. And even in Christianity, we also worship like people who are died. And probably we don't say that are ghosts. We say that they are saints, but still it's something that is dead. But we can like ask them for help with something. And but my question is, long ago I went to a lecture at Institute of Ancient Studies at NYU, and it was lecture about Chinese traditions and Chinese rituals, and this woman was talking about sacrifices. And she was saying that sacrifices, even human sacrifices, were very like common in China and for a long time. So what you can say about this? Because rituals could be different. You see, rituals just following some, I don't know, sequence of something, or if it was the whole ceremony with sacrifices and whatever. Could you please comment a little bit on this?
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I will say this. Okay, first, worship or pay respect your dead ancestor, dead parents. I think it is my personal bias. Okay, I will say it's a universal. Probably even you see in the Western world, not really in the same form, but doing something or thinking about hope my dead grandpa will help me on this, something like wishful thinking. So this part I think, and the sacrifice, okay, different form. And interesting is you mentioned about the human sacrifice. I believe human sacrifice probably exists in all tradition in the primary society. China is not different, and I believe they have a human sacrifice. But I believe also this human sacrifice, well, again, you can give me many examples through the 200 years history. They have the emperor, he died, have the people sacrificing. Forget about this. Let's talk about the regular people or the rich people. I think that they exist long time ago, but during Confucius' time, okay, they already changed to use the fake people. Okay, they use, so if you remember in China, if you went to Xi'an, that's the terracotta soldiers, thousands, tens of thousands of soldiers for the Qin Dynasty, the emperor. They already use the model for the human sacrifice. So that means human sacrifice exists before, but at least during Confucius' time, at least it's not a common practice anymore. Okay, Confucius still condemned this kind of non-human, the replica of a human sacrifice. Confucius famously condemned this kind of behavior because your mind still thinking about have a human with you. So that's wrong. Confucius has very strong word. Say, if you do this, you will have no offspring anymore. That's very serious punishment in Chinese tradition. So, okay, that's a Confucius condemnation on the human sacrifice, not only on the real human, even on the fake. Okay, so that's how I like to comment. Yeah. James, please.
Yeah, I'm kind of the only place where I really get ticked off is the music, and I'm just wondering, you know, it's like, well, a musician, or you know, I understand, you know, like musicians kind of control the environment to a certain extent. They can change your mood. Music can change your mood. Music can potentially even control your will. You know, you might be very relaxed and not want to move, but then you hear music and you want to get up and dance. So I'm just wondering if Moshe was, you know, is much more of a conservative than you make him out to be. You know, he's a military man. Even though he's defensive, he is actually opposing unification of kingdoms, unification of cities. He's much more religiously inclined, I think, than Confucius. So I'm just finding. And he believes in ghosts. Isn't he like a typical reactionary right-wing person?
Well, I think that's a tough question, but I only can express my own opinion. So I will say he's left. He's not conservative. Again, that's my. I think last year we probably spent 1 hour discuss this. So I should not make it short. Okay. So my definition, progressive left means change the society. Conservative right means go back to the ancient time. Okay, so Moaism, Mozi is thinking about changing the society. Okay, he think we should do this, but that's just my opinion. Okay, so I think thank you for sharing and bring this one. Okay, so we have 3 hands up. So I think we cover 80% of this, but that's one thing I want to share this one. So and I also promise I don't want to go over time too much. So we have, I think, Phil, Kevin, and Mark, please. Okay, Phil, please.
Yeah, I want to answer James's thing because I was also a little outraged by that thing about music. But nonetheless, I think at least in the blurb that I read, the little that I read about it, he was being polemical, and he wasn't so much against music as he was against the Confucian school of music that wanted a kind of systematic structure, and he wanted to liberate it in a sense to be a lot freer. So that was partly just a way to snipe at Confucius, but also the fact that it was becoming very systematized rather than a free expression. That's the way I perceived it. And not so much as he's against music as such. At least that's what I thought.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. Kevin, please.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. Actually, grab the first point. When we read Mo Tzu, compared to Confucius, basically, this is going to have a good idea. For example, he's correct. The Mo Tzu is not adore the music like you whole country is try you spend lots of money for the music, try pray, special prayer time, national prayer. The second point, Mo Tzu, we didn't emphasize, he also obviously first of view scientific thinking in Chinese philosophy. It's later on, he, for example, in China, they launched 2017, launched one quantum satellite, they called Mo Tzu.
Oh,
that's
yeah.
in fact, yeah, that's why they called Mo Tzu. You kind of see that they use, for example, Newton. They say that, if one object keep going, if no effort. He mentioned that too. That's just one example.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning this. Yeah, because that's on I think that he focused on the technique, right? So he really do the work. And another thing in the contribution on the science is his logic thinking. And we will talk about, I think that's the subject.
Yeah, by the way, he used to be a carpenter.
Yeah.
like Jesus, maybe, right?
Yeah, like Jesus is a carpenter. Yeah. Yeah, another thing why he called Mo, okay, the Mo means ink. If you did the carpentry, you have to use the string with ink, right? So you can draw a line straight, okay? So, and another reason, people believe he's a carpenter, okay? Because the Mo, you have to use the string and put the ink, and then you mark the line, okay? Mark, please.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment about historical context with regard to this issue of reactionary versus progressive and the thing about music. To me, the way that I understand this is in a very different state of society than the one that we live in. In the 100 schools of thought, the Warring States period, this is a period where class society is consolidating and distinctions between people are increasing. Society is becoming more centralized and more oppressive, but at the same time developing technology. But on the outskirts of that, there are still people living in a primitive tribal type way that we would call like tribal. And so like Taoism in particular is looking back to kind of like pre-class society and seeing that as better. But in our modern context, so seeing that as like more equal and better. But in our modern context, we don't look back for better. We look back and we see kings and slavery and tyrants and stuff like that. We look forward to better. So I agree with Jason's categorization of putting Mo Tzu and Lao Tzu as conservatives, but that's in the context of their time. You could easily, looking at our historical time, you could flip that. And you could say they're more like egalitarian. You could see them as more progressives. But in the time that they were opposing the dominating tendencies towards increasing stratification of society, increasing concentration of power within the empire, et cetera, et cetera. So in light with that, similarly, the comment about music, like today in our kind of like modern industrial society, music is a popular thing. And it's everywhere. But at this time frame, things like music and literacy, these are things that only a very select elite have access to. And so I think, I could be wrong about this, they're very associated with ritual and privilege and pretense and all of the arts. Like if you think about medieval Europe, all these serfs would slave away for all this time so that they would pay some guy to make a statue in the church or something. Art wasn't something that ordinary people had in their houses. And I presume in ancient China, music would be similar. An ordinary person didn't have the time to learn how to play a musical instrument. They didn't have recordings. They couldn't go to the royal court and listen to music. That was just something that the emperors and his court, etc., did. So in that context, Mo Tzu's thing against music is kind of like us being against like somebody driving a $400,000 car or something. It's just like an extravagance for an elite few. It's not something that that is a popular thing for the masses. So in our context, when we think about being against music, we might think of something like ISIS or Al Qaeda or something and wanting to repress that. But that's different because music now is a popular, widespread thing, and it has been for hundreds of years. But in that historical context, I don't think it was. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, thank you for saying that. Yeah, that's right. Because music is a different concept. Okay, so I should show the picture because the Chinese instrument is huge, right? You have to use the bronze, and then there's a tone. There's a group of people to perform. It's not like you get a guitar and you can sing. Okay, so that's expensive. Okay, thank you for mentioning this. Yeah. Another thing, thank you for the talk about conservative and progressive. Yeah, the chart I put there is during that time, that's thinking, not in today. In today, you probably want to flip. So, thank you for mentioning this. Okay, so we have a few minutes left. Let me quickly go through Moaism criticism on the Confucianism. That's important. I'm going to mention this one, and then we call for the today. And then they have a state of nature. I think we can put in the later Moaism together. Anyway, we are going to talk about Moaism again. So formula these 4 things about the criticism. I think we cover most of them, but I just summarize, right? Confucius doesn't believe, Confucianists do not believe in the existence of heaven and the ghost, right? Because they say, they will make heaven and the ghost unhappy. That's the result. Okay, that's their criticism. Confucius insists on elaborate funeral and the practice on 3 years mourning on the death of a parent. Traditionally, for 2,000 years, if you are government official, you have to resign or you have to on leave for 3 years if one of your parents died. So technically, you will have 6 years, okay, not working, okay, because so that's the Confucius teaching. He's against it. Confucius stress on practice of music. I think Mark already talking about, and the Confucius belief in predetermined fate, mandate of heaven, okay, which will cause people lazy, not work. So I think we also talk about this one in the early time. So I like to share on the conclusion on one of the chapter. Okay, that's his writing. He talking about, after this chapter 4 called Against Confucianism, he drew this conclusion. Those with long life, okay, so he said that the Confucian scholar, okay, is like this. Those with long life cannot exhaust the required study. Okay, Confucianists ask people to study the ancient texts. He said too much. You cannot read so many things, even you live a long time. The vigorous youth cannot perform all the ceremonial duty because Confucius' duty, the ceremonial ritual is too much, too heavy, too elaborate. So even the youth cannot have the energy to do this. Talk about music. The rich cannot afford the music performance. He said the music is too complex, too expensive. Only the extremely rich people can do it. Okay, doesn't make sense. Okay, so he drew the final Confucius. That's attacking on Confucius. Confucianists teach this weak art to mislead the ruler and promote the music to spoil the people. Their doctrine are not needed for the time. He said their doctrine is outdated. That's back to Mark talking about. That's why I call it Confucians are conservative and the Moaism are progressive, because he said this kind of ritual is out of date. Their teaching cannot educate the people. He said that's basics is not right. We are moving forward. That's back to my point. Moaism is progressive. Yeah. So I think I will stop here now for today, and let's have a few minutes to discuss and the suggestion for today. Okay, so thank you, everyone. Okay, so we still have 25 people. Okay, so go ahead.
Good night, Jason.
Yeah. Anything you want to talk about? You can have a few minutes to talk if you want. Otherwise, yeah. Okay, we have Isabel. I give you the final, well, not necessarily final word, okay, but basic, please. Any?
Thank you, Jason, for a fantastic lecture. I just wanted to ask a question. This is actually my first session. I'm quite excited to be here, and I look forward to your future talks. I do have a question about what your thoughts are, and I apologize if you guys discussed this before, but out of curiosity, what do you think are the fundamental differences between Western and namely like ancient Greek and Roman philosophy versus Chinese philosophy?
Well, I think that's too big a question for me to answer. So I will expect you come here more often. Okay, yeah, because personally, I'm very interested in the Western philosophy, and I also have some of in my group of the Bertrand Russell's History of Western Philosophy reading. Okay, every Thursday. Okay, we are doing this, and that's my primary interest. So some people criticize me. I look at the Chinese philosophy in the Western point of view, but I kind of agree and disagree because I grew up in the Chinese philosophy, and then I get interested in the Western philosophy. And when I look back on the Chinese philosophy, one thing I'd like to share is when I read the Chinese philosophy or read the ancient Greek philosophy, I think that I try to, instead of criticize how useful, how to benefit me on this, I kind of put me in that situation and see how these people react to the situation at that time, and then judge them by that. So that's the way I do it, like to share. And to compare, I think from time to time, I will release my view, and I always compare with Western and just compare more and to be party more. Yeah. Thank you, Isabel, and welcome. We have a Karen, Mark, and Phil.
I just had a quick question about earlier and in the book, since you posted the whole thing and I was reading the earlier chapters, and where he's talking about the origin of the schools in on page 35. He says that there's a social class, there's the feudal lords, and then the commoner was also called small men. So I know we talked about last time that small man was the biggest insult for Confucius. Was it the same words as peasant? Is he basically saying, or is there a distinct? Are there two senses of small man here at play?
Okay, small man doesn't mean peasant. Okay, small man non-junzi, which is let's say junzi is Confucius concept of moral, the moral agent. You want to be a junzi. Okay. Opposite of junzi is a small man. Okay, so we will talk about this, but small man not necessarily a poor man, bad man, criminal basis, not junzi, as we can call it. Okay, thank you. Who's that? Mark, please.
Yeah, I wanted to attempt to briefly address Isabel's question about the difference between Western and Eastern philosophy. First of all, I would say that's not the best way to categorize it. It would be better to categorize it as Chinese philosophy versus Indo-Grecian philosophy, because Indian and Greek philosophy are almost the same with respect to Chinese philosophy. The biggest difference is that in Indian and Greek philosophy, social issues like morality and ethics are derived from metaphysical conceptions. And the main division in Indo-Grecian philosophy is between what later becomes described as idealism and materialism. And that's related to religion versus atheism. That doesn't really exist in Chinese philosophy. In Chinese philosophy, the metaphysical ideas are not widely in dispute. There's the idea of the conflict between materialism and idealism. That's not something that really exists in ancient Chinese philosophy, but it's very strong in Indo-Grecian philosophy, and it manifests itself in all of the religions, the monotheistic religions that we're familiar with. But in China, the emphasis is more around social organization directly, and the metaphysical aspect, like Mo Tzu pulls that in, like to support his kind of social organization. But in the Indo-Grecian philosophy, it's more like the social organization is predicated on a certain idea about what the nature of reality is, as opposed to, like in Mo Tzu's case, he's kind of pulling that in to support how he wants to organize reality. So I would say the most basic fundamental difference is the relationship between metaphysics and ethics. In Chinese philosophy, ethics comes first. In Indo-Grecian philosophy, metaphysics comes first. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah. Who is next? Phil.
By the way, thank you for that, Mark. I just want to ask a question based on my ignorance. I heard that Mo Tzu, Moaism, actually, in a way, was actually a very powerful counterpoint to Confucianism at one time, but it was relatively short-lived. First, is that true? And if that's true, is that because Confucianism was so entrenched that it finally was able to sustain itself and cast off this sort of like this sort of rivalry in a sense, whereas other rivalries came to more prominence than Moaism?
Yes. Okay. I don't know how long Mozi lived. Okay. But Moaism become very, very popular during the warring state. Okay. We will share next week when we talk about Yangzhu. I think Mark suggested me to talk about Yangzhu for eventually I make it. So okay. So next week we're going to talk about Yangzhu. Yangzhu is, if you remember the chart, I put the Moses on this side, Yangzhu on the other side. Okay, they are opposite two sides. Okay, these two schools are the most popular school during the warring state. Okay, not Mencius, not Confucius teaching. That goes later. So you will see Mencius attacking on both sides, on Yangzhu and on Moaism. Okay, so next week we will see that. And I put the sign up here, so I would like see everybody said it's kind of a continuous from today's talking. You will see a totally opposite teaching, okay, from the other end of Moaism, what Yangzhu is talking about. So we have, is that Alina?
Yes.
I think you are echoing.
Yes, I walked away from another device. Could you hear me okay now?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay, wonderful. Yeah, it's a great presentation. So thank you so much, Jason, and everyone who contributed. Just really wonderful.